crawl out and told the world about what happened. It's just horrific. And then you have Seven, who has been used by the Borg as this emotionless tool to assimilate thousands of other beings over the course of her 18 years of assimilation, and suddenly being confronted with this scene of mass slaughter. Bones bleached in the sun, bodies turned to greasy ash, and she's feeling it on her hands, and she's realizing this is what the murder of 80,000 people feels like. And empathy hits her like a wave. It just bam. Suddenly, that's like the worst moment for it to turn on, but that's what it takes, and it connects her to her past as a Borg drone. And suddenly there's all the guilt that comes with it. How many lives did I destroy? For how many thousands of beings was I the last thing they saw before their individuality was stolen? And it's
brutal.
Great.
Yeah.
It's a terrible moment for Seven, but it's also a vital moment. It's the opening of her heart, and it changes her. And then after that, she's on a mission. She now becomes Seven on a mission of both vengeance and atonement.
And broadening it out to the real world, that getting people to see other people's issues or life or just who they are,
your humanity.
Yeah, and that lack of empathy that some people have, they can't get over it unless they see something. But the problem is now they see stuff and they don't believe it. So we're getting to spots where you can't have real life people have that awakening and have that empathy for people because they don't believe what's right in front of them.
Yeah,
that's a whole other.
Nobody knows what to believe. Nobody knows if anything has been deep faked or AI.
Or they're
told, and that's part of why it's so vital in the story that she's not seeing it on a monitor. She's not seeing it at a distance. She's to get down on her knees, literally down on her knees, and she has to physically touch it. And it's when she touches it and feels, the greasy ash of slaughtered bodies and sees the ash of pulverized bones on her hands. You can't deny that. It's like suddenly the reality is there and it's sticking to your hands. It's the equivalent of blood on your hands, but different.
Yeah. Now, Star Trek is such a huge playground to play in. I just want to know, like, what is, you dedicate so much of your work, so much of your life towards creating more of it. Like, what does it ultimately mean to you? Like, why?
I mean, I guess I grew up with Star Trek imprinting on me. The way a duckling imprints on the first moving thing it sees. My folks, when I was a kid, would plant me in front of the television, and before long, I discovered syndicated reruns of Star Trek. And so I grew up with the ideology of Star Trek wiring my brain from the very beginning, with the notion that we are better as a species if we are together. It is better to make friends than enemies. It is better to make peace than war. It is better to create than to destroy. It is better to heal than to kill. The real world often doesn't work that way, but part of the problem is that we don't choose to make it work that way. If more of us chose to make it work better and insisted that the people who answer to us and run things, if we insisted that they ran it that way, and if more of us voted people out who don't, we could steer the future. We could steer humanity toward a better future. Humanity can have a better future, but it has to want it. And people have to choose it, and they have to fight for it, and they got to work for it. It's not going to come for free. And I think that the value to me of Star Trek as an entity, as a intellectual property that has captured imaginations of people around the world, is that it is this beacon. It says, even when we're not perfect, even when we screw up, we backslide, we can still choose to correct. We can still choose to say, yes, I've made a mistake, but I can do better. I can atone. I can fix things. We can choose not to be the same crappy people we've always been. We can choose not to be the same violent people we've always been. We can choose to put aside the anger and try to find a better way. Whereas, I think that there's equal value, for instance, in a franchise like Star Wars, where the message of Star Wars is the violence and danger of fascism is going to be omnipresent. It is never beaten. Every generation must fight it again, but that doesn't absolve you of the responsibility to oppose it, to resist it, to fight, and to fight for something better and defend something better. These are both equally important, equally valid messages. It just so happens that, I think that the Star Wars one is a little more hopeful. I'm sorry, the Star Wars one is a little more cynical. The Star Trek one is a little more hopeful. I prefer Star Trek, but I also love Star Wars. So what are you going to do?
So to follow up on what Don's saying, he was talking specifically Star Trek. What about specifically Seven? What is it about the parameters of Seven, her personality, the entire canvas of her? What attracts you to being a part of contributing to that canvas?
And I'd just like to add to that before you answer is that for me, I grew up on Next Gen and loved Deep Space Nine, and I watched Voyager and all that stuff, but I never was super connected with Seven when I watched Voyager. But I think post show in novels and in the Picard series now, the character has developed well. And I'm surprised that I'm like, wow, I'm ready to watch the show and read more books with her now, and keep going. But both what is there with Seven, but in general, how do you choose these characters to explore?
And David, I want to apologize for Don making my question about him. So, correct
me if I'm wrong. You're a New Yorker, right?
I deeply apologize.
Yeah, so am I. He completely understands Trevor. New Yorkers. I'm a Queens boy, so.
Yeah, I live in Queens.
Oh, do you? I was Bayside growing up.
I'm in Astoria.
Oh, great. Okay. Trevor, we found in the woods, yeah, but I'm stuck up here in Boston with him. But yes, why
to answer your question, to speak to your question about what it is about Seven, she is for Voyager, she's their take on the outsider character in the way that Spock was the outsider in TOS, the way that I think Odo was meant to be the outsider in DS9, the way that Data was the outsider in TNG. There's always, in most Trek series, someone who represents the outsider, and he can't be much more of an outsider than Seven in that she was, in the Borg collective. She had been stripped of her humanity. She had been reduced to a drone, a tool, a slave. And they liberate her. And at first, she doesn't even want to be liberated. In many respects, she's, got the equivalent of Stockholm syndrome, whether or not that's a real syndrome that's being debated today. But let that go. But she's got all this psychological damage. She's been cut off from her humanity. And one of the things that I found intriguing is I took this deep dive into her psyche. Even after she's liberated by the crew of Voyager and is now living among the crew of Voyager, who are all very open-minded, they're the best of Starfleet, they're trying to nurture her, they're trying to guide her back into human civilization. So they're all very kid gloves with her. Nobody's that harshly critical. And they're very gentle with her. Whereas real life is not going to be that way once she gets back to Earth and the Federation. Suddenly life is a lot meaner and a lot less forgiving and much more prone to prejudice and anger. So she's trying to rediscover her humanity. And as I took the deep dive into her head, I realized from her point of view, here she is. She's 32 years old. She's finally striking out on her own, cutting the apron strings from her surrogate mother figure of Janeway. And she's realizing that she has been robbed of all of the most formative years of her life. She was robbed of her childhood. Importantly, she was robbed of her adolescence and her young adulthood. All the periods in which most people spend figuring out their identity, who they are, what they want to be, what their sexuality is, what their gender identity is. All those sort of exploratory periods of her life where she should have been building her identity, it was all taken away. She was robbed of all of it. And now she's basically trying to reintegrate into civilization, into society, but she has no idea how any of it works. At one point, I believe I referred to, I think this was in the scene in the club, where she's trying to figure out the mechanisms of flirtation. And it's like a language everybody else speaks that she was never taught. And she's trying to figure it out on the fly, but she can never quite pick up enough to understand what the hell anybody else is talking about.
And Dave, she had a terrible one-night stand. I mean, that was great. I loved it. I mean, it was like
that was probably the suggestion of Kirsten Beyer, because she said, well, it's okay that she has this moment. She says, but it's important that you show that there are negative sides to it, negative consequences on the emotional level. And I said, sure, I get that, and I'll definitely deal with that. So I took that suggestion from Kirsten, and basically, my approach to detailing Seven, exploring and sort of seeking out connection, romantic connection, sexual connection, anything, any kind of human connection. It's all about the same sort of vulnerability that anybody faces, regardless of orientation, where you're coming from. There's an intrinsic vulnerability to putting yourself out there and trying to find somebody else to have an intimate connection with. No, it's a human thing. It's not about any particular gender or anything. It's about, you're opening yourself up to the potential of getting hurt. You're trying to connect. You're trying to feel wanted. You're trying to feel good about yourself. And in a way, you're trying to find that through another person. And it's just so complicated, especially if, again, for Seven, she has been robbed of 18 years of her life when she should have been learning how to do all this. And now she's trying to pick it up on the fly, and just it's all going by her at 100 miles an hour. So she thinks this is going to be this sort of transcendent moment, but as she describes it in the book, instead of transcendent, what she got was tawdry, and she winds up feeling sort of unclean about it, almost ashamed of it. And like, I put together a Spotify playlist of songs that inspired the book, and it's up on Spotify even now. And one of the songs that was chosen for this, like, I have certain music that's in mind for the club, and but the song that's playing on the morning after when she wakes up alone is a song called "The Rush" by J.J. Wilde, and it's all about desire and shame. It's about wanting to connect, but feeling ashamed of your own desires. And there's a line in the song, one of the lyrics, and I'm glad my mother can't see me, because if she did, I don't know how I would go on. And then there's also a line, it's easier, to learn to forget. Now is when I learned to forget. It's easier than learning to live with regret. So it's basically that's sort of where Seven is emotionally at that point. Is she's yearning for connection but doesn't know how to get there, and nobody seems inclined to be patient enough to teach her. But that's also what's going to be important about the relationship she forms later in the book, because one of the other things, again, element of the classic Bildungsroman style, is she's going to meet the first great love of her life. Yes, she dated she dated Chakotay, and that didn't work out too well. They eventually obviously had to break up, because canonically they broke up. And I sort of explained some of the reasons for that when Seven is denied her place in Starfleet. This creates a lot of envy and a lot of anger and a lot of resentment, especially when Chakotay gets promoted, and now he's going to be in charge of this top secret project on the Protostar, which is getting all this sort of attention, but it means he can't bring her with him because she's a security risk. And so she envies him, and she's also angry at being left behind, and she takes this toxic stew and she self-sabotages their relationship, and it's why they end up, she's just got too much anger. She's got too much resentment built up, and she can't forgive him for succeeding and having to leave her behind. So as much as, they wanted to hint at Chakotay being some, big thing for her at the end of Voyager, I see that flaming out. So I sort of felt like I had this opportunity for Seven to find the first great love of her life. And of course, those things don't always last. And we all have, or many people, I should say, many people have that sort of first early, big relationship, that first time you felt really hard for somebody and it lasted for a while. And some people marry their first true love and some people don't. Sometimes those relationships, for any number of reasons, don't work out, and you move on in your life. So I presume that's, again, going to have to happen with Seven and the character of Ellery Cade at some point, but it doesn't happen in this book. One of the things I was positive I did not want to have in this book was the disposable gay relationship. I did not want the trope of bury your gays. I wanted to make sure that the interesting person of color who's part of the team doesn't have to get killed to show how dangerous the situation is. It's little things like that. Like, there's the trope of, the bury your gays is probably the most pernicious of them, where you give the character the relationship, but somehow feel compelled to kill off the gay lover before the end of the story drove me crazy. And I know queer readers hate that.
Mhm.
So I made a conscious choice. I'm like,